谢谢大家回谢北北时间，我是大叔萨。
我是大树家。
大家好，这个第一件事情要先祝大家地球日 Earth Day 快乐。
耶，地球日快乐。
这个周末有些朋友就地球日嘛，其实大家有个传统，全世界其实都是就是会去野餐这样子。那这个时候我就只能诚实的报告说我没有去野餐，我觉得野餐有点麻烦，要准备东西。
至少可以心里面去野餐啦。
哦，不会，我每天都心里野餐的，是，我想我在家里，我还要出门。好，没事。我们这次一方面也是地球日，那可是更重要的是，也是有找到一位这一方面对于这个垃圾处理的这种专家这样子，所以呢，还是那句话，大叔都会讨论一些很奇怪的节目。我们这次邀请了 Nature Nate 那他现在在一个单位叫做 Reset Carbon， 那他是一个顾问，然后就是帮这个亚洲地区的国家，这样他做到他们的这个 carbon footprint 的 targets。然后呢，他自己其实也是一个 podcast 的主持人，他的 podcast 叫做 Waste Not Why Not。然后呢，他是7年前从美国用那个 Fulbright Fellowship 来台湾，然后他其实在台湾做了蛮多很有趣的事情。所以我们今天跟他来讨论这个垃圾处理啊，从一个非台湾人，可是来看台湾垃圾处理，因为他是就这方面专家这样子。那大叔家你觉得呢？
对，我们透过这位 Fulbright Scholar 的眼光来看看台湾，就是我们有时候台湾自己生活在这里，我们比较没感觉，那我们就透过一个比较客观的眼光来看看台湾这个垃圾处理跟所谓的 waste management 这一块做得如何，然后我们可以以下呢听听他的讲法。
我们现在进入节目。We are very lucky today to have Nature Nate joining us to talk about waste management. Please say hi to our listeners, Nature Nate.
Hi, listeners. This is Nature Nate, host and co-creator of Waste Not, Why Not? My real name is Nate Maynard. I'm a senior consultant working on carbon accounting, but for today's show, I'm going to be talking about garbage, talking trash.
Ooh, I like
the
that.
uncles.
We love talking trash as uncles. Welcome to the show, Nature Nate. And, okay, so I'm assuming everybody here, have spent some time living in Taiwan or now living in Taiwan. One of the chores is always having to dump the trash, chasing after the truck during the nighttime. I've done my share. Now, Nate, I understand that Taiwan actually has been credited for doing a reasonably good job, all things considered. Can you give us a sense of, where we were and where we are today in terms of waste management?
Sure, happy to. And thanks for having me. When I first came to Taiwan in 2013, so probably way later than most, but when I came here, it was part of this cross-strait research trip, and I was the only environmental person. And when I came to Taipei the first time, the thing that striked me and that strikes many people is there's no trash cans and there's no litter. And so that just started this persistent question and sort of how did Taiwan do this? How did Taiwan do this? And why have I never heard about it? And to keep a long story short, Taiwan did this, started doing this in the 90s. Shortly after martial law ended, people started protesting the waste situation. I didn't live in Taiwan at this time, but I understand that there was piles of garbage and lots of litter. And Taiwan wasn't super clean in the 90s. No. And if you look at the statistics at the time, Taiwan had about a 70% collection rate. So that meant that 30% of Taiwan's trash was just going out, just not into a system of any kind, just into nature, which is, I think, an important statistic to remember, because that's today what Ho Chi Minh City, what Indonesia, Jakarta, that's their waste collection rate. So Taiwan in the 90s is where a lot of Southeast Asia is today. And I think that when we think about Taiwan, we shouldn't compare Taiwan to, let's say, Austria or Germany, but we should think about Taiwan in this sort of, Taiwan's, I don't think, a developing country anymore, but, at that time, the waste management infrastructure was.
Right.
So Taiwan had this, really poor waste collection rate. And then basically over 20 years, Taiwan developed all these waste management policies and built an entire recycling industry. And now Taiwan has about the 4th or 5th highest recycling rate, depending on how you count it, in the world. And Taiwan's per capita waste generation is less than Japan, and it's about 1/3 of the average person in California. So the average person in California creates about 6 pounds of waste per day.
6 pounds, that's a lot of waste.
Pounds. And Taiwan does about 2 pounds or 1 kilogram and change.
Right.
Even 1 kilogram per day is a lot, but anyways, I digress.
Yeah. Well, you might think that, but globally it's pretty low.
Right. Well, actually, I take that back. Given the amount of empty wine bottles I need to recycle, I can totally see that.
Oh, we don't count those. Those are recycling. Don't worry.
So you're talking about waste that will go into landfill?
Yeah, just pure waste going to landfill.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
On average, right? Because you save up I save up my trash, right? Because the trash truck, I miss the trash truck, and
that's right. That's right.
Average kilogram per day.
Right. But does it include compost? Because in Taiwan, there's a separate bucket for compost. Is it?
Also, no, that doesn't include compost.
It doesn't include.
So it's just the municipal waste generation rates that that's just how they classify it. So with like waste, there's a lot of how do I phrase this politely? There's a lot of confusing terminology that's used.
Sure.
You might have seen articles that said like Sweden diverts 99% of its waste and has to import stuff to burn in its waste incineration facilities. I don't know if you've seen that viral article, but Taiwan does the same thing too. San Francisco has an 80% diversion rate. Well, that's different from recycling rate. The food waste composting, Taiwan started that in, I think it's 2004. And that was one of the earliest municipal composting systems at that scale. Definitely higher, faster than most in the US. That compost system was created because of the pay-as-you-throw system. When Taiwan made people buy trash bags, and you had to pay for the volume of waste you threw out, people protested because they're like, I'm spending a ton of money on kitchen waste. So this is ridiculous. I don't want to pay for that. So the government's like, okay, I guess we have to do food waste composting now. The waste management story is a lot about protests.
Yes. I still remember growing up in the 80s back in Taiwan. You're right. I mean, it felt like, garbage collection or waste it was a big issue, and people got together. Now you said that back in the 80s or the 90s, the collection rate is about 70%. So where are we now in Taiwan?
Taiwan has like a 99% collection rate. Like
pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, most like what we think of as developed countries have like a near 100% a waste collection rate. So that just means it's collected. It doesn't mean it's disposed of well. It's incinerated in the case of Taiwan, but it's at least tracked into a system. Now, I say this, and I'm sure people listening are like, well, I've seen litter in Taiwan, and I've seen illegal dumping, and yeah, that's true. But how do you measure something that is illegally done and outside the system anyway? So based on what we think, the collection rate is a lot higher. And when you walk around Taipei, it's not like there's not garbage just spilling out everywhere.
Right. Well, no, I think just sort of somewhat anecdotal, but just if you, before COVID, you can travel to Japan, to Southeast Asia, to the US, and all this place. I mean, you kind of get a feel. I mean, especially Taiwan, especially Taipei. I mean, it's pretty clean. I'm not too worried about having litters, blown into my face, kind of thing. But so just kind of staying on this. You mentioned, in the 20 years since, Taiwan obviously done a lot of things right. And, we are really proud of it. So are we, I mean, like what are the sort of at the policy level, what are things that has been implemented that has proven effective? Or conversely, if there are policies everybody thought, that's the right one, but it turned out to be a really dumb idea. I'd love to hear about those too.
Yeah, sure. So let me give you sort of the overall structure that what Taiwan did. And it's not just what Taiwan did. If you look at countries that have high recycling rates, low waste generation rates, they all do this actually. And it's first you have to have some type of extended producer responsibility system, which is a really long, boring name for just basically bottle deposits. You get a return fee for what you recycle. So that you have to have that. you have to have legal penalties for violating the waste management policies. So if you dispose of the wrong thing, or you ban a certain material like styrofoam, there has to be a penalty for it.
Sure.
And then the third piece is you have to have education.
Okay.
So you have to have people have to know what the policies are. They have to know what's going on. They have to feel motivated and engaged. And because in Taiwan, it's a pretty big ask to do your trash here. You have to buy a special bag. You have to wait at a special time of the day. You have to sort your trash properly. And otherwise you get yelled at any stage of this process. So it's really like quite a lot, you know, versus the US system of just, I put it in the bin. You know, you know, I drag the bin out. Okay, there's 2 steps. So you have to have those 3 pieces, like an EPR system, or basically like a payment for the volume of waste you generate, legal penalties, and then education. And if you look at the EU, they have this, right? They have EPR schemes across the EU. They have pay as you throw generally, not every state, and they have a lot of education. And if you look at Japan, South Korea, same thing. Japan actually has quite a low recycling rate, which is surprising to some people, but they're quite good. And and South Korea and Japan developed almost the same system as Taiwan, a little bit ahead of Taiwan at the same time. So those are all there. And so if you look at the US has done 1 or 2 of these things at the same time, but never consistently. Or maybe some states have done 2 of the 3, but they never do all 3. So that's why the U.S. has a pretty low recycling rate.
Well, you know, I just kind of push you, Nate, to kind of talk about, you know, when I think of, like, you know, to your point, like 20 years ago, and then today, you know, there's the 3 pieces are in place. It's almost like the populists need to go through a phase transition, right? You know, before it's like, no, dude, just like throw it out, like, you know, I'm gonna go protest because this is inconvenient, and then so like what is the process from what you've seen? It's like, when did people just like, no, we want to recycle, right? You know, I mean, so what was the transition?
Yeah, I mean, you guys might be able to tell me that more than I know.
I have no idea. That's why I'm asking.
If you look at a policy level,
sure.
If you look at how those evolved over time, what happened first was sort of around when martial law was ending, the government strategy, there was obviously Taiwan's economic boom was happening, tons and tons of waste. Okay, let's build landfills, because that's totally the first response typically, but Taiwan's doesn't have a lot of big flat open land to use for landfills, and the places that you can do that are next to communities. So once martial law ended, those communities started protesting against landfills, which is
bigger, right?
Yep.
Yeah. And so then, okay, the government thought, all right, well, let's look at Japan. Japan has waste incinerators. Europe has waste incinerators. Why don't we just do waste incineration? Sure. So the government had a proposal to do 36 waste incinerators. And then now people of Taiwan able to protest said, no, I don't want that either. So then they protested. Taiwan ended up building about 24 waste incinerators in total all over the island, which remind me to talk about that later, because they're getting quite old now. And so they built the waste incinerators, but there was the protest. And so if you can't do landfill and you can't do incineration, you have to do recycling. And it's probably worth also mentioning that when I'm talking about recycling, I don't think this is like a virtuous environmental activity. It's great. It helps. But we should probably think of this as like the minimum. It's not like, and this is more of like a waste management conversation rather than a Taiwan is a green champion conversation. So with this recycling,
we're trying.
Taiwan's trying. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Taiwan's making great progress. But sometimes when I talk about recycling, people are like, well, you know, recycling isn't that good. I know.
Well, sorry. Please elucidate. What do you mean recycling is not that good?
Well, what people will say is that if you do recycling, you're just enabling the production of, let's say, plastics, of more
I see. Got it.
You're not really solving the environmental problem.
Right, understand.
And then at the end of life, instead of burying it under the ground, you might process it 1 or 2 more times, and then you'll bury it under the ground. But inevitably, it's going to the landfill. We're just stretching out that time. But that's important, right? Because when Taiwan was developing these policies, Taipei built, I think it was the Fudakeng landfill, and then after 7 years, it was filled. So there was in Taiwan, there was a real issue of landfills, and Japan as well, landfills being filled up. So there was this need for recycling to basically stretch out the lifespan of a material before it reaches its final final resting place in the ground.
Sure. Right. Yeah, no, I guess one of the things I'm thinking, because it's interesting, Nate, you mentioned that in the context of the U.S., recycling and waste management, of the three key pieces, in the U.S., I suppose it's a state by state level that people tend not to get all three pieces right, and I'm like, sort of looking at the U.S. I mean, given what what would be, if let's say, Gavin Newsom, right, the governor of California, asking you, okay, Nature Nate, like what do I do? How do I, foster this phase transition so everybody is on board? Or, I mean, what would be your suggestion?
I wish Gavin would give me a call. It's funny actually. I was one of the last times I was in the U.S., obviously pre-COVID, I was at this mini mall, by my house, and there was a petition, and the petition was, sign this. We're going to have a bill to have extended producer responsibility. I'm just going to say EPR going forward.
Sure.
We're going to have a bill for EPR in California, and we're going to ban polystyrene food packaging.
Okay.
And I happily signed the petition, but knew that Taiwan had done both of these things, done EPR 20 years ago and had banned polystyrene 10 years ago. So California, the leading state in the US in terms of recycling, was proposing a bill that Taiwan had done 10 and 20 years ago.
Thinking about it.
And by the way, that bill died. There was the EPR bill didn't go through, and it happens all the time. The state proposes an EPR bill, and it gets beaten down by a very aggressive waste management lobby, but also packaging lobby in the US. It's not a conspiracy. It's well documented that they
it's well understood. Yes.
It's known. And so if the US, the US has a couple issues. One is that there's no real comprehensive federal waste management agency or body. It's decided not just at the state level, but at the county level. So even within the US, each county will have different policies.
Understand.
And sometimes they'll have things like these things called franchise agreements, which actually set targets, not just for recycling, but for waste generation. So if you generate less waste, yes, because you sign these franchise agreements with waste haulers, and they make money based on the amount that goes to landfill.
I see.
So even at that, this foundational level, the incentives are wrong. So whereas in Taiwan, it's, the EPA is decided kind of centrally organized. There's national waste laws. There is variations amongst counties. Not everyone uses the trash bags, but generally you're able to build that economy of scale around recycling, around these processes that you just really can't do in the US. And you look at Japan, why doesn't Japan have a higher recycling rate? Well, because in Japan, the municipalities can have different recycling laws. Different waste management laws. So not saying we should have this draconian, top-down waste management authority, but we are all using the same types of waste. It's plastic bottles, it's cardboard, it's food packaging. It's not like you go to a different state and they have just radically different materials. It's pretty harmonized. So the fundamental incentives in California are wrong. There's no cost to. There is some cost to throw away trash, but it's not a high enough cost. There's not enough incentives for recycling, and the whole policy system is just a complicated patchwork. Right. It would be a big task for Governor Newsom.
Right. Yeah. No, this reminded me of our prior conversation on the U.S. energy policies, and a lot of it is, going back to my favorite word, incentives. You are not incentivized to generate green energies, and so nobody's going to do it. But I think now sort of shifting gear a little bit back to Taiwan, and I'm sure Nate, you are following this much closer than me, which is was it 1 or 2 years ago, Taiwan banned plastic straws. And
Oh
then,
yeah.
So I mean, I actually, well, in case you don't know, like everybody in Taiwan likes to eat and have opinions on food. And so a lot of people were like freaking out, especially restaurant operators. So it's like, oh my God, this is going to be so inconvenient. We're going to find replacement and all that. And then I just recall as sort of a casual observer that, all this noise and complaints, no protests as far as I know, like lasted about 6 months. But when the policy becomes active, like everybody just like, okay, yeah, we figure it out, we kind of live with it. But is this, I guess it's two-part question. One is, anything that, we haven't seen, in the background, but the other is that, is this kind of common, at least at a regional level, probably not the US, but is this the common experience?
So the straw ban, straw policy in Taiwan is really interesting because it is very reflective of Taiwan's approach to waste management policies, but it's also but kind of reflective of policies designed lately. It's not that effective. So the interesting thing about the straw ban was it targeted large chains, malls, and government institutions. So it wasn't like a universal straw ban hitting night markets, hitting small restaurants, things like that.
Okay.
So it was designed in a way to target those that had the capacity to find alternatives. The problem was with the straw ban, it was easy to circumvent because you could just use a bioplastic straw. And I mean,
right. Bamboo straws, for example.
I say that, because what happens when you make a bioplastic straw is you're using polylactide acid, PLA, not the other PLA. And that straw is used, that's just it's a polyester. So it's still a plastic straw. You're just using corn as the feedstock.
Oh, so, I did not know that. Okay.
So it is an opportunity for establishments in Taiwan to use metal or reusable straws. And I have seen a lot more of those. But I've also seen a lot of, fast food chains just using PLA straws that increase their marginal cost some tiny amount. And they get to say they're complying with the straw ban. It did change some lids. If you go to fast food chains, they'll just have sort of like a like the boba kind of plasticky top instead of the straw and lid combo. So it's led to some good things, but it's I think it also represents too that Taiwan's just done most of the other low-hanging fruit for waste management. When you've taken care of everything else, you have the recycling, you can move on to these really niche things like straws and cutlery. It is that was sort of a wave that was brought out culturally because there was this viral video of a sea turtle that had a straw.
That's right. That's right. I remember this.
And all of the ocean advocates were saying, yes, we need EPR. We need to restructure our waste management system. We need better waste collection. And somehow that really complex policy piece was boiled down to ban straws.
Well, it's something specific, I suppose.
It is an actionable item, so people decided what the heck. So
it's like the tip of the iceberg, but I mean, it engaged people, and what happened, that was translated into policies in a lot of, I think it was something like 30 plus US cities have banned single-use cutlery, straws, like they kind of lump all that together. So the end policy result was good. I mean, we shouldn't be using a super advanced material we can use in space like plastic to make straws that we use for 15 minutes. I mean, that's just a crazy trade-off.
Right. No.
Right. So Nate, you were talking about how Taiwan has done, for the most part, the low-hanging fruits. What are some of the other sort of the reach goals you would sort of, you're thinking of that could be sort of applied to Taiwan in the case of, Taiwan's waste management?
Well, I'm sorry for cutting in, but I do want to like get one more item.
Sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
So far, Nate, we've been, you've been sharing your insights regarding more at a consumer level, right? Individually, that the things that have to chase after the dumb drug and whatnot. But that's obviously a very critical part. But again, looking at a Taiwan experience, waste comes in different forms, not just individuals. Like for example, what's the word? Ship demolition, right? For the longest time, we retire ship, and then it generates all kind of waste, and then it's sort of it. I mean, I don't think Taiwan does it anymore, but that activity is essentially being outsourced. So I am wondering, sort of looking at a more industrial side of things. I mean, is Taiwan doing the right thing, or is Taiwan just shifting it to the poor countries?
Yeah, that's a good question. And a little bit of both, I would say. In terms of, well, let me just speak about industrial waste a little bit. When I worked at my think tank previously, we published a paper about eco-industrial parks in Taiwan. There's one in Kaohsiung Linghai Industrial Park, which their idea of recycling is quite vast, I would say. They include steam recycling as a type of recycling.
What does that mean?
So when you have an industrial process like smelting steel, for example, you need to generate a lot of heat and then a lot of steam, and you may not use all of that steam, or the steam is still hot enough that it could be reused in another process. So what the government did is they worked with some large companies there, China Steel being the main one, and they created pipes between different facilities so that excess steam could then just be vented off and used by another company, and that company would pay for that steam because now they don't have to pay to produce their own steam. So that's a very specific sort of steel and chemical based sort of industrial symbiosis, but that's sort of what we would look at in terms of industrial recycling. So for industrial recycling, Taiwan has about 70% of Taiwan's total waste is industrial. And so it doesn't get brought up a lot because the average consumer has no way.
We don't think about this, right?
Yeah. I mean, and how can you like vote with your dollar? It's not like, oh, I'll buy the car with the higher recycling rate at the facility. I mean, you don't know.
I'll go to TSMC shareholder meetings and complain about,
Yeah, well, they're a whole other interesting case study about it. But, we're broadly speaking about industry in Taiwan. The recycling rate is allegedly 80%, but in practice, I think it's probably more like 50 because that 80% number includes things like steam that I mentioned and sort of like overall industrial waste. So I think if you look at the materials, it's about a 50% recycling rate for industry, which is not that high, but it kind of betrays the fact that actual recycling in industry can be really interesting. So there's, I pulled up an old presentation I used to give because I had some of these specific industrial examples that I often forget about. So like one example would be like blast furnace slag. Taiwan's able to use that slag to recycle the metals out of it and use that in other processes. In the past, that cost about 1,000 NT per ton to dispose of. And Taiwan has like a magical waste disposal industry that we may not want to talk too much about, but there's, waste disappears sometimes. And now these companies can actually recycle blast furnace slag and make between 700 or 1,000 NT per ton, which isn't a lot, but if you think about, paying 1,000 NT per ton to generating 1,000 NT per ton.
No, it's real money.
You have to do. And they've done other things like there's waste acid, like for semiconductors, the waste acid etching solution. Before they would dump that or process that and dump that. And now they'll collect that, send it to a third-party chemical recycling company. They'll filter it and then send it back. So it's almost like chemicals as a service. And that's because of one, enforcement for environmental protection laws, but also these waste management incentives, increasing the cost of waste disposal, incentivize these other industries to exist. So there's a lot going on with industrial recycling, and Taiwan is doing well. I wouldn't say it's particularly groundbreaking. And I've spoken with the Linghai industrial operators, and actually we tried to cover them for a video segment for some foreign media, and we were interviewing them. And they said, "Oh, we're not special." And I just was like, "Why would you say that to the media company? We're interviewing you. Oh, we do what everyone else does." And just being humble, and but they were special. So
we're all special in our own ways. I think that's
there you go. I think for the most part, they're trying to express their Asian virtue, humility.
A lot of my job when I worked at the think tank and I was doing this waste management research was taking Taiwanese people's humility about the waste management program, seeing what was really going on, and then translating that for a foreign audience, because Taiwanese people are very critical of their waste management program because it's it's what's here. And so inevitably when I'll be quoted in some article talking about trash, people will be like, "Oh, well, Nate, it's not as good as it seems." And I'm like, "Well, nothing is." So
we do live in the neighborhood, so all I see is the problems in my neighborhood. So therefore, I'm very critical. It's very natural. Right.
So that's sort of about industrial waste, and then looking forward. I mean, there's a if we talk about the circular economy, which is sort of imagining a world without waste. Taiwan's really done kind of the bottom of the pyramid there very well. But the things that we want to do are reuse, repair, sharing.
Sure.
The best waste is the waste that's never generated. So Taiwan is, there's some good, U-Bike is sort of a good example of circular economy, but there's so many things. Like my favorite statistic is that the average person uses a power drill for 15 minutes a year.
Okay.
So if you buy a power drill, I mean, maybe, if you're a hobbyist, maybe it's more, but like the average person, you drill 1 or 2 things and that's it. That's your year.
There's really no need to buy one. Right.
Yeah, you don't need to buy one. You can just share it. So there's been some examples in Taiwan of libraries of things where you can go and just rent tools that you need or for free, or just borrow them and share them.
Sure.
Those types of things, sort of the sharing, the reuse, things like single-use coffee cups. That's kind of the next challenge in Taiwan, right? So the straws, boba straws, that's been sort of dealt with. But then what about the cups themselves? So there's other examples in Germany where you have a cup take back program. You have like a town, all these cafes, they just agree on one takeout cup to use. Just you can have it be designed or whatever, but it has to be kind of the right size. And you can go to one coffee shop, drink your coffee, get it to go, and then go to another coffee shop and return the cup there, and the cups just stay in circulation. So instead of having to deal with, and coffee cups are kind of a bad form of waste in general because they're contaminated with food waste, with coffee. They have a plastic lining and then they're paper. So they're a mixed material. So it's very bad. So I would say that Taiwan's next sort of consumer iteration is going to be more of these take back programs, reuse programs, sharing programs, because recycling is so good. But those are hard. That requires human interaction design, service design. It requires understanding your audience. So there's that level. And then at a technical level, Taiwan's incinerators are all now 20, 25 years old. And they're not very efficient anymore. Sort of the average efficiency of a waste incinerator in Taiwan is about 10 to 18%. So that means
what does that mean?
Like the amount of material you're putting in, you're only getting 10 or 18% of that energy back. So if you have like a modern waste incineration facility, it would be about 40%.
Okay, and then so you get energy back to like heat other things. Is that
heating other things, or for electricity generation? So in Europe, there's a lot of waste incineration for electricity generation. Somewhat controversial, but we're going to make waste anyway.
Right.
So, right. The idea is not a new one, right? I mean, back in the old days, that's just by a different name, just cogeneration, right? So
yeah. So it's not new, but it's the technology needs to be upgraded in Taiwan.
Sure.
Right. Well, I mean, speaking of the technology, just again, just in terms of the general context, what's the typical life cycle of the incinerator? Like, I mean, any capital asset need to be replaced at some point, but I mean, sort of what's the balance between efficiency and the cost of building something? You don't want to throw it away after 5 years, but you probably don't want to keep running for 50 years either, right?
Yeah, it's about 20 to 25 years for a typical waste incinerator based on, I'm not like a waste incinerator, guru by any means, but that's what I'm told. Right. Because you're burning all of this mixed material that can be highly corrosive, you need to replace the boilers. And so there's that. And then also there's been leaps in efficiency in terms of waste incineration since when Taiwan first did this. So it's not like Taiwan's necessarily a laggard, but it's just that there's been a lot of advances in waste incineration technology because people protested it so much, frankly. Part of it.
Hey, democracy at work, man. I'm telling you.
Feedback.
Man, democracy is messy, though.
Oh, that's not even talking about
just
Canada.
Like trash.
Very, very, very well said. Very well said. In terms of, if I can just ask one final perhaps question about incineration, I don't know Taiwan's situations well enough. Now, Nate, you're the expert here. Is there a possibility of some sort of cogeneration there, like solid waste energy sort of production as it has been incinerated, or have that been sort of been talked about?
That's actually, that's being proposed. And when I was working at the think tank previously, so looking at refuse derived fuels, so RDF. So taking a lot of this, industrial waste that has high caloric content, or, to the extent that it can be processed and segmented, you can turn them into pellets. You can turn them into kind of specific feedstocks and use that. So that is being looked into. The tricky thing is that you're co-generating it with coal. So Taiwan has its coal issues as well.
Yes.
Sure.
I mean, coal it seems like it's going to remain in Taiwan for a while, so maybe it's okay in that sense. Speaking about waste generation and not speaking in my sort of carbon hat,
Right.
but it's something that's being looked into, I would say, and pretty aggressively funded and supported and subsidized. It's also too around bioenergy. So Taiwan does its food waste composting, and that goes to compost or it goes to pigs. But there's some food waste that just doesn't make sense to go to either of those applications. Compost, unfortunately, is kind of a low value way to use food waste. It's heavy. There's a lot of chemical fertilizers that exist, but there's things like anaerobic digestion. So you convert the food waste into methane and you burn that as a sort of a cleaner burning fuel. So I would say that these types of, refuse derived fuels that are specific, not just burning mixed waste in a boiler. I think that'll be sort of this differentiation that we see. And that's a real collaboration opportunity for Taiwan and Europe, because Europe has a lot of these leading technologies.
Right. Well, I mean, so on that point, I am curious, sort of sitting in Taiwan, and knowing, Taiwan, sort of definitely on the right track. Is there anything that Taiwan does that's special? Right. I mean, like Taiwan, you mentioned, like, we should go to Europe and, get some of the technologies that we don't have in Taiwan. Like, I mean, do people come to Taiwan to get anything? I'm just curious.
People come to Taiwan for recycled plastic polyester, basically. So textiles, so clothing that's made from recycled plastic. Taiwan is one of the leaders in that. And Taiwan's a leader in that for two reasons. One is that Taiwan just had that technology early on. I think Taiwan was third. It was Japan, Germany, or Germany, Japan, and then I forget the exact order, and then Taiwan. And Taiwan also benefits because Taiwan has the recycling facilities. Taiwan has about 1,700 recycling companies last time I checked.
Man, that's a lot. I didn't realize.
Most people, because there's a lot of these SMEs. And then if you look at plastic bottles, Taiwan has a very high collection rate for plastic bottles. It's about 90%. Same as Japan. And Taiwan's also close to Japan, and Japan's plastic bottles are perfectly clean, perfectly sorted, label removed. Recyclers have told me you could sleep on them if you wanted to. There's just no odor at all. And that's really what you need for recycling to be effective. You need waste that's as properly sorted and classified as possible. Because then you don't need to clean it, you don't need to wash it further. Recyclers have told me, if I receive waste from Taiwan or Japan, I only need one recycling line. If I receive waste from Australia, England, the US, I need two, because I need another line just to clean and sort out the trash and sort out the waste. So that's sort of like the cost factor that goes into recycling. So Taiwan's, real value is actually this culture of sorting, of this intention of dealing with waste, of having to hold the bag, confront the trash truck, face your waste. But it's not like not a scalable technology, right? It's like a cultural mindset. But I think that Taiwan's adherence to the principles, the way it was designed in terms of the recycling funds, pay as you throw, these policies, I think that lesson is really applicable to Southeast Asia. I wouldn't encourage Vietnam or the Philippines to look at Europe. I mean, it's just a completely different development. When Taiwan was developing its waste management policy, its GDP per capita was less than $10,000 US. And it did it at the same time as Japan and South Korea, and you could argue has a better recycling system than both. So it's not necessarily a money thing. It's not just if you're rich, you have a good recycling system. It's like it is an intention behind it.
Right. Wow, this is absolutely fascinating, and again, so thank you for Nate sharing all these insights, because living in Taiwan is like I didn't know all this stuff, and I must say that as a point of pride, it's like we are special. I don't care what other people say. We are special.
Now I can feel
special.
Yes. now I can feel a lot better about myself when I chase after that trash collection truck at
You're
9
doing
o'clock.
a noble deed, special in the world. When you wash your
again.
recyclables and you hand it to the auntie, she's you're part of an amazing system.
I will now face my own garbage, as you heard it here from Nate.
Excellent. Again, thank you, Nate, for your time, and thank you for sharing all the insight. And if possible, we'd love to get Nate to come back and talk more about waste management and all the different policy, because that's his specialty. So again, thank you for your time, and we will end here. Bye bye now.
Thank you, Nate. Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.
哇，非常感谢这个Nate这么有趣的分享，真的就是专家一出手就原来台湾的这个垃圾处理那么有趣，不是只是每天那边追那个垃圾车，等一下。然后还要算什么135、246的这个没有3是没有收垃圾的，3跟日没有收垃圾，然后145对啊，有是平面，有的是立体的 ，sorry 。住在台湾要知道这种事情啊。
然后大年的话就是休3天，对不对？这个
3节都有休。
对
啊，所以不过真的很有趣，就是说他是从一个很政策，然后全世界的，不管从美国、欧洲、亚洲、东北亚、东南亚的这个做一个比较。那我觉得对我来讲很有趣的是，除了就说个人每天跟追垃圾车之外，工业的垃圾。就是这些怎么处理，甚至从可能大家比较熟悉的是像说台积电的那个厂，它出来的这些水其实是有很多这种工业的什么金属等等。那之前也提到说以前要花钱处理，可是现在其实是可以回收。所以以前是好像就是例如说以前一公吨要花掉1000块来处理，现在是1公吨你去回收之后可以赚1000块。那这个一来一回就差很多了。我觉得这件事情好有趣。
就垃圾变黄金的概念，其实这一方面台湾确实是，因为这个资本市场常常有听到说有些公司就专门在处理这种这种垃圾变黄金的概念。我觉得这个是，也许从台湾的角度，也许也有可能走出一条还不错的 business model 的道路。
就很 infrastructure 的东西啦，然后这种东西感觉上，我不知道这个我还真的没有想过这一门这个 business， 不过感觉上这个不见得是可以 scale， 就是每个 region 或者每个国家它有自己的 regulation 等等。
没错。
不过这个东西反过来讲，就是你做起来的话，那个就是你的啦，没有人会进来跟你讲。
话又说回来，只要有钱赚，大家就会开始动脑去想这件事情。对，
是啊。
不过刚才大叔厂刚也有讲到，就是说那台湾跟其他国家比较还是算是。有些方面是走在人家前面，还算是不错的。这我是虽然不至于惊讶，但是心中还是想小小的台湾真的是不要说台湾之光啊，就是说，因为以美国做例子，因为我们以前大概台湾人住在加州的也很多，所以以美国来讲，其实加州，因为我德州跟加州都住过，我想。大署长应该也是2个地方都住过，或是很多地方都住过了。就是以加州来讲，加州是这种回收啊、倒垃圾啊，是已经比较是相对来讲严格一点的。但是刚刚那个Nate也有讲，就是说台湾跟加州比，台湾其实还是走在前面。这点我没有什么很大的惊讶，但是就让一个专家来帮我们确认这件事情，心中还是觉得说，OK， 那台湾真的是还算是不错，自己给自己拍拍手这样子。
是啊，不过我觉得就是说从一个政策角度，那个 Nate 他讲的，就听得懂啊，因为我相信不管是美国人还是不管你什么人啦，没有人会想要把自己的环境搞得很烂这样子，所以这个就还是回到政策上的。那我想那个至少Nate他的 argument 比较简单，就是说，以台湾跟美国相比。 美国的政策是不完整的，所以就是这边漏那边漏。那因为就是这个就是很现实嘛。我如果不用每天去追垃圾车，其实我也没有特别喜欢这件事情。可是就是说从一个政策角度，当然一方面我是接受，我也支持这个政策。可是如果在美国没有这个政策的话，我干嘛？对不对？
当然，
这个，所以我觉得这一点，当然就是说里面细节这个我就不熟悉。那我相信某种程度，台湾在这一方面，我猜啦，就是所谓的那个 second mover advantage，就是当别人犯过那些错的时候，你就说哦，那我要避免什么东西。那可是话又说回来了，就说，所以不见得是一定怎么样，就重点是要怎么把它做出来。然后另外一个我觉得也很有趣的是，那当然我们最后也跟Nate讨论到说，那台湾有什么值得让别人学习的吗？那他当然就是讲到一些台湾有一些例如说台湾的这个纺织业一直都是很强的，所以很多这种，因为我不知道大家知不知道，纺织的布料最近其实都是那种很高科技的布料，都不像我们小时候就是棉花就棉花，
还有奶龙，对不对？尼龙布以前
对，以前就是很单一的原料这样。那现在很多就这个，其实我也是因为有朋友是在那个服装设计，然后说你知道吗？现在的那个牛仔裤的布已经是非常高科技，因为就是以前都。这真的想当年的事情。以前牛仔裤买的时候，你要先洗个3次，很硬，
很不舒服，对不对？
对。而现在随便穿啊，然后就 anyway 好，没事，所以越讲越远。可是就是说，因为这样的话，台湾对于这种布料的这个回收等等，是听说是，我觉得他说是全世界是第2名、第3名，因为就是还蛮厉害的。所以
对，因为布料回收对整个环境来讲也是一个好事情嘛。因为这种纺织跟布料的制作本来就是一个非常非常费水的一件事情，所以它能够回收多少，真的就是算多少。
是，对，我这个我在 Uniqlo 在买衣服的时候看到那个东西，
是
真的吗？哇，
真的，
那个是呀，对，所以这个，不过还是那句话提醒大家，就是说地球日环保等等，其实一方面也是过得快快乐乐，那一方面其实我有时候跟朋友解释说，某种程度就是我希望我能够对下一代说，我真的尽力了。我不是说我要过得苦行僧，完全不是这个意思，是就是合理范围内，我真的尽我的力，就是这样子。所以这一次也非常感谢 Nate 来跟我们分享这个回收政策。那如果大家有兴趣的话，我们可以再请他回来，我们继续讨论其他相关的事情。
谢谢大树上的分享，所以希望我们2个以后都可以跟下一代讲说我们尽力了。
是这个听起来还有点蛮孬的用词吧。Hey, you know,
we try. Good luck.
Yeah, it's on you now. 是。好，那我们最后第一个还是跟大家报告，那个下个礼拜我们的节目是我们有我们这个最厉害的那个团队的成员之一 Oliver， 他自己有一个 podcast， 然后他之前有一集讨论到那个零用钱。然后就说他几岁的时候，然后怎么样，然后就这太有趣了，我们就邀请他上我们节目，当然是很熟了，然后讲说那你这个，因为他比较是接受方不过他已经大学生了，那他现在开始赚钱。那从我的角度，当然我小时候也是有零用钱的，然后可是现在有自己的小孩子，然后就会有一些。这个零用钱从另外一个角度考量，所以这个请大家多多期待。然后呢，最后也是非常重要的，我们还是回到很感谢 Nate 来参加我们这个节目，跟我们分享他的这些专业的理解。那也介绍一下他自己的 podcast 是 Waste Not Why Not， 然后他是这个鬼岛之音旗下的英文节目。然后呢， 他这个节目呢，在2020跟2021年在美国科学促进会的是媒体伙伴，然后是芬兰创新基金会在2020年点名为世界循环经济解决方案之一的节目，sorry， 这个字要念对。这个，那当然也非常感谢这个鬼岛之音 Ghost Island Media， 的这个跟我们一起把这个节目做出来。那其他相关的资料会在我们粉专上，那也非常期待我们下个礼拜继续讨论。拜拜，
拜拜。
谢谢大家收听今天的谢伯伯时间。在节目正式结束之前，我们要感谢谢伯伯时间的制作团队。我是 Hannah， 我们的团队成员还有 Ariel、Lalisa 跟 Oliver， 当然也别忘了大叔桑及大叔甲。如果你喜欢我们的节目，别忘了订阅、按赞、分享、留5颗星。有任何想法都欢迎留言告诉我们。而在这段疫情里，大家也要记得照顾自己，关心身边的人。祝大家平安健康，我们下集见咯，拜拜。